Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Xpansion. In this podcast series, we will be talking to guest speakers who are experienced in expanding their business overseas or they are local experts in foreign markets. If you have the ambition to build a global business, this is the podcast for you. In this first episode, we will be chatting with Tchebotarev, the founder of 500 Pix. For those who don't know what 500 Pix is, I'll give you a brief overview. It's a photography community that allows you to showcase and share high quality, high resolution photos, and it's all inspired by user generated photos. It was founded in Toronto, Canada by two Russian immigrants, Ev being one of them. As the founder, he experienced building a company from the ground up and expanding the business overseas. Welcome, Ev.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Ev, just to start out, I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about 500 Pix, what your mission statement was behind creating the brand, and kind of what you were seeking out in creating a business opportunity from it. Could you elaborate some more on 500 Pix?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the first thing is when you're doing a startup, you don't create a mission statement and then go build a business. It's kind of like comes not just naturally, but it's basically the marketing that comes in and says like, oh, we need a mission statement for that. So when I started off creating 500 PX, that was in the early 2004, and I became an avid photographer. I was spending time looking at a lot of photos, taking a lot of photos, taking photos of everything that I can see around me. And when I wanted to share them, I looked around and I found out that there is no Facebook because it wasn't launched by the time. There wasn't Flickr because it wasn't launched. And there was no Instagram, Snapchat, or anything like that. So I thought to myself, well, maybe there's a chance that I can, create something that unites photographers and gets people together. And I did. And it started off as a little community based on a livejournal.com platform. It's still around today. And, kind of like fast forward a bunch of years later, it seemed kind of like good enough to build an actual website on top of that and to build an actual community on top of the existing community. And kind of like later on in 2009, when I partnered with my co-founder, we built it into the business.
Just the idea of where you started it and then getting the idea that it could go onto a website and then taking that leap forward almost. What gave you that leap?
Looking back in 2004, I knew nothing about programming and I knew nothing about, things like that, designing and things like this. So I basically had to come up with something that would allow me to connect people. And I did that during my lectures in the university. So I was quite bored at the lectures. So I was emailing photographers, inviting photographers, kind of like promoting the community that I started back then, and kind of like tried to make it to grow as fast as I can. So for the first initial thing to start, you don't need anything. You need just a microphone, you need just a laptop, and you have a podcast. How popular the podcast becomes, it's up to you. Or to become a star these days, you just need a phone and you can start, live streaming, you can start posting Instagram pictures and so on and so forth. So that is the only initial investment that most startups actually need to take off.
When it comes more towards the business, once you created the business, and I read up a little bit more on you. Could you explain kind of what your role was as you started the business and maybe how it changed?
I change my business cards all the time. So initially, it was just me and it was a hobby. And in 2009, I partnered with a friend of mine, Oleg, and we built it into a business. So he was a technical person and was programming background, and I had to take design basically as a part of that, and I built the front end for that, which is not ideal. So I called myself a creative director for lack of a better word. And eventually we settled that Oleg was the CEO and I was the COO, running all the daily operations, talking to lawyers, payroll, everything that needs to be done behind the scenes. And that continued until approximately 2014, where I settled into more product role. So before, kind of like product wasn't really something that we distinguished as the specific role to manage. So we were doing that together. But in 2014, when the company grew to more than 40 people, it was time to have kind of like a dedicated role. So I took as the chief product officer. And later in the year, it's changed to more like, which meant that I was more in charge of the marketing, promotions, and connecting with the community and figuring out what community needs in order to grow and what we need to give community so that we can connect and make it as effective marketplace that we were building at the time.
So tell us more about building and growing 500 Pix community internationally.
A lot of people want to know how to, grow something out of zero into millions of people. And I think there's no like major secret to that. It's just a lot of patience and a lot of persistence. So for us, when we were growing that from, let's say 2009 to 2011, that was a very slow and painful process because we had to convince photographers, people all over the world, that this is a great platform to be on and have their pictures on. And people are usually lazy. They're like, oh, I don't want to do another social media. What's so special about you? So it's kind of like you have to convince one by one, basically. And that's how we grew to around 100,000 users. And from there, we noticed that the network effect took place. 500px was a beautiful place. It was ad-free. It displayed images much, much larger and in much better quality than any of the competitors. So people who also cared about their images started noticing that and started writing about that. And that was the biggest blessing that we've got, where people cared enough to actually write a book, their readers, to join the community, join the 400px. So from there, we would see clusters of people joining different countries, like in Germany or Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So every week or every couple of weeks, we would see one country basically blow up in terms of activity, and half of the comments on the site would suddenly turn into Thai language or German or and like recently it was Chinese. It's kind of like it's basically highlighting how big and diverse the community is. And still today you can see photos and there's comments in all the different languages, because people don't treat it as like English only or or American only website.
How did you manage to differentiate 500px from its competitors, such as Flickr? Do you run your community differently? What's the secret sauce?
So 3 parts. First of all, our benefit of having a live and active site was that we were constantly evolving and changing that, whereas Flickr was stagnant for the last 12 years, and basically by now is basically dead. Nobody takes or talks about Flickr other than diehards. So it's basically the presentation layer. So it's something where you would show off your best works, sort of like your physical gallery space. Whereas Flickr is more like a shoebox where you just store all your photos and you never look at them again, unless you're sentimental and you want to go back to really old, crappy photos and feel something. Or nothing at all, I guess. And the third thing is that we were really active with engaging with the community. And what I mean by that is that people could write us on Twitter, people could write us emails, and both me and my co-founder, we would actually answer them, half a day, all day, every day on Sundays and weekends. And we were photographers. We were getting out and trying to take pictures, trying to get better. Whereas in Flickr, there's none of the people in senior management that were photographers. Nobody in senior management of Flickr or Yahoo actually takes photography seriously. And that was it. That was a thing where people could see that I go out and travel and try to get out and take pictures and enhance my skills as a photographer and interact with the community that we're building. And then you could see Flickr, where none of the management ever interacted with the community or ever cared about what the community, kind of like responding back to the community.
Sounds like your passion for photography and the responsiveness towards 500 Pix community is the key here.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail. Basically, I think that the passion for building the product for people like us, for photographers, was the ultimate advantage that we had over any other, Flickr or any other competitor in that space.
Give us an example of running a community-based campaign worldwide.
Well, I think the nearest example that I can think of is the Global Photo Walk. It's something that we created 4 years ago. And currently, it started as a very small event with just a couple of dozen cities. And now it combines hundreds of cities, thousands of people all over the world. That is community led. It's organized by the company, by 500px, but it's community led. So community leaders in each city help organize and help make it a success for all the rest members that join that.
Very cool. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, your marketing efforts were very on point. And it really helped drive the company to new limits, new unseen limits, and really helped get your name out there. And you spoke a little bit about that market effect. Once you guys had hit a certain number of users, you started seeing just exponential growth, and you didn't have to do too much. It was just talked about. Certainly something that many startups look to reach. That is definitely like a milestone in these startups. But I'm just curious, because startups nowadays are really starting to work other avenues when it comes to marketing and sales. And we're seeing a lot of startups building out partnership programs where they partner with other companies in order to grow their sales and grow their own brand. From your company, did you have to create any strategic partnerships to move the brand forward?
Well, if I can say high level, and if I can swear on the show, I think it's all bullshit. But the reason for that, when you're a tiny startup and you want to partner with the big company is in the position to waste a lot of your time. They have business development people whose sole purpose is to go around and waste your time. And when kind of like when you have this realization that they invite you for lunches, they pay for dinners and coffees and whatever, and it's all great, but you have 10 people on your team, 15 people on your team, and they have thousands of people on their team. So obviously they have a lot more waste and a lot of kind of like extra people to do this kind of things, and you don't. And I think we wasted months building some partnerships that actually were not on the even foot. So nobody really gained anything out of that. It's not. And again, like there's not a single thing that a startup can do to have a massive success in the first try. So it's always of little things and only little improvements, and looking at the numbers, talking to people, having quantitative and qualitative feedback in order to build something inch by inch.
Right. So it's about trial and error. Did you have any specific partnerships to break into new overseas markets that you were looking into?
We did try and we did partner with a bunch of distributors when we launched the marketplace to sell to license the photos as stock photos. So we did partnerships with Japanese companies and European companies, and later we did partner with a Chinese company that became our investor. So there's been a few partnerships that brought in the money and the expertise needed to launch in those markets.
Were there any specific criteria that you were looking for in a partner?
That's a good question. I don't think there is, there's always aspiring companies that you want to work with. And, once in a while, maybe once a year, we would actually have a list of companies that we would love to work with. And obviously, those are the companies that everybody talks about, whether it's, Google or Apple or Facebook. So those are the big companies that everybody knows, but also a bunch of companies that are growing at a fast pace. And yeah, I cannot mention some of them, but companies like Uber and Airbnb, for example, and a lot bunch that are popular in the news. So those companies can help you get your name out as well. And I think that's very important because we are a smaller player compared to many other bigger players in the photo stock market, and it's important to be we want to be number one, but we're not number one yet in terms of sales or other metrics. So we want to be in the top tier by competing with the big guys, and to be kind of like considered as one of the options, one of the better options that they can choose.
You mentioned that 500 Pix has a Japanese partner, a European partner, and a Chinese partner. How was your experience dealing with these partners from around the world? Do you have any suggestions for other startups that are looking for local partners in these markets?
Well, I think there is distribution deals that we manage to have, and they're more on the passive side, so it doesn't need a lot of kind of like hand-holding. The biggest partnership that we have is obviously with our Chinese investor. There is a constant dialogue and a constant kind of like beeline that's established so that we could share the expertise and tech knowledge in order to we basically build a Chinese copy of RNDPX that wouldn't be blocked and would be accessible much faster and much more localized for the Chinese market. And that is something that a lot of people achieve because, again, if you're in China and you are trying to use Western tools, then Flickr is blocked, Instagram is blocked, Google is blocked, Uber is out of China. And basically, nobody can make it work. And FireNPX is there, it's open, and it's fast, and it's localized for a Chinese market. So that's something that is very unique for us compared to any other players in that space.
For yourself and your team working together with a Chinese partner, are there any do's, don'ts, and learnings that you could share with us?
The learning number one is that the whole deal is probably going to be done over WeChat, including all the documents, lawyers, late night and early morning communication is going to be done just through the messaging app, which is fairly unique for any investor or startup out here on the East or West Coast. The other thing is that as any deal or for the West Coast to raise money, it's a very simple process. If you have a concept or an idea, you can probably raise a seed round fairly easily. When you're dealing for a big round and with the Chinese investors, the deal will get increasingly complex, and the deal will have very specific breakpoints that Chinese investor will basically demand, and they may be flexible in a lot of other things. There will be points that they away from because of the way they try to figure out the documents. So it's just something to do with the logic and culture, I guess, and less to do with actual uh, uh, ideas or actual kind of like misconceptions about some legal, like legal parts of the documents.
How did you actually find your Chinese investor slash partner, or perhaps did they find you? Did any of your investors in the US help you in this process?
The thing with VC is that your first investors will sort of determine who your next investor is going to be. And what I mean by that is that if you raise from horrible investors first, you'll have a huge trouble raising from the reputable investors later on. So for us, when we raised from Andreessen Horowitz, it helped us open doors to China because we were dealing with their team to help us get introductions to Chinese companies like Xiaomi and a bunch of others in order to get corporate deals from those companies, because we understood that back then in late 2013 and early 2014 there was a lot of money that was to be spent in those markets by those companies. So Andreessen Horowitz has been very active in helping us get the connections, get the meetings, and get there and try to sell specific deals that we had in mind.
So it seems like Anderson Horowitz, as your investor, had already vetted your Chinese partner. Hence, after you went in, there was already some trust established.
Right. I think that is not a completely accurate word, but more like filters, in a sense that there is a link established between A16Z and a bunch of Chinese companies that constantly ping them in order to get to the A16Z portfolio companies. In order again to get best deals or get introduced to companies.
From the recent blog I read on you, I noticed that you decided to step away from 500 picks after all this. You've created a successful startup. Could you please give us a few pointers? If you could do it all over again, what might you do better?
If I were to do it all over again, I would do it much faster. It was the first startup that we ever built, and you do a lot of stupid things. So first of all, you waste a lot of time setting things up, and what I mean is just like simple things as setting up the offices, setting up payroll, setting up kind of like settling in and figuring out all the basics that any established company of 20 plus employees would have. For us, it took significant amount of time because we're making tiny steps toward becoming a company that is well run and well managed. And second time is so much better. It's like riding a bicycle, so next time you get to do this, you simply I have a checklist almost in my head, so it's just you're doing these things automatically, and that could save just months and months and months of setting up, and the process becomes way more streamlined. And I guess in the proper way, knowing that we know now, we could probably do it instead of 7 years. We could probably get it down to 3 years. So that is the biggest advantage of doing multiple startups, I guess.
Very cool. So what happens to you now after your journey with 500 picks? What's on the horizon?
For me, now there's two things that are of a high interest to me. Number one is establishing a link between East and West, between Southeast Asia and China in particular, and the West. And what I mean by that is actually helping Western companies gain access to the East markets, and helping East companies figure out how to do proper products and proper features that would be accepted in the West. And that is something that I think that is highly interesting to both parties, to companies in China and growing companies in other markets in Asia, and as well to the West that want to open the next frontier That would be, Indonesia, China, India, and so on and so forth. And the second thing is uh, uh, there's a lot of things that I wanted to do around informal education. And what I mean by that is that I believe a formal education system that we have right now is becoming obsolete very quickly in the environment where people can access to where formal education is very costly, very time consuming, and a lot of resources are becoming available online. And I feel there's going to be a monumental shift in how people perceive and gain knowledge through more informal sources. So that's something that I'm trying to figure out how to help developing markets and established markets, but mostly developing, get access to that informal education.
So, to your first point on bridging the tech world between East and West, what was your experience there?
Right. I was super lucky to be invited to work in Taiwan for a couple of months for a social media company. And, there's a lot of things that you can learn in a short time span: how the team operates, how the team makes decisions, kind of like what kind of like drivers that the team has. And what I found is that, the enthusiasm and the capabilities of the team are there, but and obviously everybody can read up on the product management and things like this. But what the team lacked is the actual, almost like an actionable checklist of what to do first and how to learn from step one and go on to step two and complete the step two and go to step three. So those little baby steps that help increase the effectiveness of the operations. Those are all well written and often discussed on podcasts and blog posts and things like this. But actually putting those, it's like reading a self-help book. If you read a book like that and you just go on with your life, it doesn't work. So you have to take that self-help and make it into actionable items that you actually go and do every single day. So that was one of the most eye-opening experience.
In terms of team decision making, was there any difference that you experienced between the East and the West? Is it more top down, or is it a team effort to move things forward?
Right, absolutely. I think I've noticed that a lot of teams, and not just Taiwanese, but Chinese and all across Asia, the decision making is very top down. So it is the boss and the manager who tells you what to do, and you, even if you're not happy, you accept it as the single source of truth. Whereas in the West, it can still happen, but for example, at Fire and PX, we actively ask any member of the team to challenge the management, and that if the team doesn't challenge the management, it's a very bad team. For us, we feel that, and I personally feel that if you don't ask questions, if you don't push back, then you're not really a team player. You're not really a critical thinker, because I want everybody to question me all the time, and I want constructive criticism and constructive discussions, because I may not see something that other people see on the ground or doing customer support or any other jobs. And I'm most of the time rather wrong than being right. So getting other signals from the team helps me correct the course and make less mistakes going forward. And I think that's the great thing about having a strong team that can actually help you with that.
Were you able to implement this in the startup that you worked at in Taiwan?
Um, that's the thing that I was trying to do over the 2 months that I've been spending there. And I did this by, basically asking people to question me. Not accepting what I tell them as the truth, but actually going and researching themselves and coming up with answers and demanding the answers and demanding again to question me again, and kind of like doing this again as the exercise, doing that daily and weekly, and so on and so forth, in order so that I knew that I was there for a very limited time, so that when I would leave, the dynamic that was built would continue on, and other people would keep that dynamic going forward, because it would hopefully become a second nature for them.
Definitely some cultural differences between these two business worlds. I applaud you for being on the forefront and trying to work through the cultural change. When you went to these countries, when you started traveling abroad, I'm very curious because there's so much cultural difference there. What was some of your most memorable experiences in these trips you took that changed your viewpoint on businesses?
That's a super broad question. I think there's a lot of kind of like little things that I would notice. And for example, recently I read on some Western tech blog that Japan is getting access to Apple Pay, and Japan is very advanced with mobile payments. But on the ground, that's actually completely not true. A lot of Japanese economy is cash based, and I would probably lie with the number, but it's somewhere between 80 and 95% of all transactions are cash based. When you see numbers like this, and then somebody tells that, oh, it's so advanced in mobile payments that Apple Pay is late to the game, people don't understand what's going on the streets. People don't go or haven't been to Tokyo and haven't observed people purchasing things, looking at things. The same thing when I was in Indonesia, for example, and you see what locals do, what kind of apps they have on their phones, what kind of apps they use. You start realizing that mobile gaming is huge in those countries. They would spend hours and hours playing specific games while being on the bus, while waiting in traffic jams, while just sitting somewhere, and that would continue for hours. Or when traveling in China, you would see that the only app that people would have open is WeChat, and obviously that is been explored in depth in the West, where WeChat allows you to do everything, and therefore there's no need for any other app for people. But that's kind of like very telling. It's almost like my little coffee shop test, where I would go to the coffee shop and walk around and see what apps people use on their smartphones, because that's more telling what's popular and trending there than any other analysis or reports that you can get.
All right, for your final question, who would you recommend us to interview that can best contribute to the topic of running a business overseas?
The best people to interview, and I may be a little biased here, but actually people who are immigrants and people who are in the new country. So there's a bunch of my Canadian friends who are living in Silicon Valley, and I think they have a different, kind of like a different attitude towards Silicon Valley, and how they want to work through the Silicon Valley and how they want to expand further. And the first generation immigrants who go to the Silicon Valley from other countries, but they also have a very strong connection to their home countries. So for example, I met a company out of YC that once they graduated from YC, they went back to Indonesia to work on a fintech startup for their local Indonesian market, because that's where they're from. So this is something where you can gain a highly valuable, Silicon Valley type experience, and then go apply it to emerging markets. And post interview, I can connect you with a few of those that are doing meaningful work without trying to build another Snapchat or another Instagram. So something that is meaningful to the lives of regular people in developing countries, and kind of like outside of the distortion field of Silicon Valley.
Right, great advice, Ev. I want to thank you very much for sharing your insight on us and for joining the show on Xpansion.
Well, thank you for having me.
For our listeners, if you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast. If you have any suggestions, or if you just want to say hi, you could head over to our website at www.xpansion.global to leave your comments. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, I want to give a special thanks to PandaDoc for its generosity in sharing its facilities with us. PandaDoc, document automation, helping you close more deals faster.